So, I'll ask the first question. Let's start with the basics. What is critical race theory? What do you think critical race theory is? If you want to erase it from the curriculum, what is it?
I'll take a shot at that. So critical race theory is rooted in two theorists, a gentleman named Derek Bell and a lovely woman by the name of Kimberly Crenshaw. What the media is trying to get you to believe critical race theory is it's the teaching of history. That is not what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is rooted in the court system. Kimberly Crenshaw basically was finding that Black women were receiving harsher sentences because of their gender. So she coined this term intersectionality to reflect that Black women carry what's called the double burden when they come before judges. And so what critical race theory is it is a methodology that helps individuals. Typically when you come in contact with critical race theory, you are at a graduate school level or in a law school program. And it is a series of methodologies to help you view race and its impact systematically on policies throughout the country. And so it is not simply a telling of history, it is a system of methodologies and theories to help you view race in our country.
Anyone want to add to that? Anyone want to add to that?
Sure. So when I think of theory, I think of a way of understanding something. So critical race theory is a way of thinking about how race and racism shape law and legislation. So thinking about how legislation and policy impacts every facet of our society, from housing to healthcare to education, and all of the laws and legislations that impact that through race and society.
Fantastic. So now, these are words that they've dropped. Legislatures, the theories of society, the laws. And if you're going to have laws, and you're going to have legislating laws, how you should think, what you should learn, how this relate to employment. We're going to entertain questions from the audience. Sister Holmes, do you want to entertain questions now as we're going on? In terms of, I see Elder Ferguson wants to get her microphone.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
That critical race theory is meant for, as Pascal mentioned, that it is meant for the graduate, the professional, the teaching of critical thinking. And you want leaders, you want adults, particularly who go through school, to know how to analyze facts and be able to assemble them and ask questions about what it is being presented to them. It is a critical thinking system. And I think our teens need it, but it's not about just history, it's about everything.
Again, okay, all right, so hold your questions. We're going to take your questions, and if you want to take notes, you can do that too. All right. So that will make me move on to the next question, and the question is, how is critical race theory defined by its opponents? People who oppose critical race theory, and my sister, if you think that you oppose it by the legislature, do you think that makes sense? Go ahead.
Wait, I'm sorry.
The question is, how is critical race theory defined by its opponents, those who oppose critical race theory in the school system?
Yeah, so I think I kind of mentioned this just a little bit. I like Dr. Sullivan's definition of critical race theory. I think that those who are against critical race theory are more so trying to be against what they call revisionist history. So the works of individuals like Nicole Hannah-Jones, individuals that are finding old evidence and trying to kind of rewrite the American narrative right? Destroying Christopher Columbus, 1492, Ocean Blue, all this kind of stuff. They're considering that, our rewriting of that, and saying this is not the only narrative on how the creation of this country has come into being. They're considering that to be an erasure, quite frankly, of identity. So you have a whole side of conservative white Americans who feel as though this new history that's trying to consider the Black experience, the Black oppression, as being that of an attack on them. And so because it is an attack on them, they then want to say, oh, I am not for anti-racism or I'm not for critical race theory, but in actuality, they haven't studied these terms and don't know what they're actually against. What they're against is what seems to be an attack on the personal American identity. That's what they're against.
All right, hold that thought, because we're going to visit Ron DeSantis in Florida. Keep that in mind. Go ahead now.
Yeah, I wanted to say something. So my understanding of critical race theory is when we talk about race, we can talk about, okay, this group doesn't like that group. But critical race theory, in my opinion, well, not my opinion, but my understanding of it, is how is race intricately interwoven into the fabric of this country. So when we think about the Constitution, right, everybody tells us the Constitution is colorblind, right? It's equal protection under the law. But when we study outcomes of different racial groups, we see disparities. So if there are disparities amongst racial groups in the justice system or in redlining and housing, critical race theory wants to address the systemic issues that affect the disparate outcomes that exist between the different groups. But to answer your question, in terms of what the opponent says, so before I answer for the opposite side, okay, let me just put this disclaimer out there. I am pro critical race theory. I'm pro the discussion of it. I think these types of debates are very healthy. But I do also want to address what the other side is concerned about. So if we're looking at things strictly from a power structure, the other side is saying it's harmful to children, which I don't believe this. So I'm putting that disclaimer out there already. But I just wanted to give, again, credence to the opposing side. But in essence, if we're only teaching kids to look at things from power structures or racial structures, we won't be able to get to the racial promised land of everybody just being judged based on the context of their character and not necessarily the color of their skin. Again, I don't agree with this. I'm only saying what the other side is saying. No, I'm just not going to jump on a lot because sometimes my perspective's a little different. So I just want to put it here. Okay, that's who said that.
No, I think that was the representation of the opposite side.
Right. So that's in essence what they're saying. Why are we, if we want children to look at each other just based on who they are, why are we badgering this history over their heads, and why are we introducing that at, into the classroom at sometimes very, very young ages?
She's a student of Ron DeSantis. I just want to put that out there.
I'm not. I can't stand Ron DeSantis. I'm not at all a student of his, but I do think in order to have healthy discussions about things, we have to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of the people who disagree with us. We have to steel man arguments. I do that all the time. Which is, I may not agree with you, but let me see where you're standing and your purview to see why it is that you're drawing the conclusions that you're drawing. So I'm not a student of Ron DeSantis. I can't stand him. Just for the record.
All right. So I just wanted to go back to our understanding of critical race theory. So we understand that it was allowed in legal circles, and I think from my interpretation, it was meant to answer the question of why does there seem to be so much inequality in the Black community despite all of the advancements of the Civil Rights era, the Civil Rights Act, and all these laws that were ostensibly supposed to help Black people achieve manifest destiny.
Correct.
Right? And so critical race theory says that the reason it seems like this is because it is like this. There is inequality, and it was baked into the system from the very beginning. Right? So critical race theory looks at what laws were enacted by the framers of the United States and how those laws have come to bear on conditions we see today, right? So if you look at inequalities in the housing systems, conventional housing, legal, education, justice systems, all of these things are case studies that critical race theory looks at and says, well, if you want to look at, connections between all of these conditions, these social conditions now, go back to when the Constitution was enacted. And the first law that was enacted after the ratification of the Constitution was the Naturalization Act of 1790 that flatly said that the only people that these laws cover are white people. So critical race theory is saying from the very beginning, people in this room were not considered when these laws were created. So the issues you see now are because you were never considered when it was never inclusive to begin with. So when we're looking at some of the inequalities, we need to find connections. It's to me, it's actually like a reckoning of America because it's a lot like what you do when you go to counseling, right? You sit there and you talk about your childhood experiences and how they impacted you now. So that is pretty much the same thing. Let's look at some of the laws that were created to disenfranchise whole groups of people, and then let's talk about how that has trickled down into what we see today: disparities in housing, disparities in the education system, the justice system, where the labor market, where white families make clocks as much as black families, right? These are statistics from like a few years ago, so I can only imagine that it's worse now. So that when the opponents argue against critical race theory, what they seek to do, in my opinion, is create noise, so that as soon as you hear critical race theory, you're triggered and you turn off. But no one's saying teach this stuff to kindergartners or fifth graders, right? This is complex. This is like the context that you would look at. This is not stuff these kids are looking at, right? But if we are to if the school system is to produce critical thinkers and to have these people address the issues of tomorrow, then we need to teach them what they are today. So in that regard, I think there should be some way of finding how to make it age appropriate. It should not be pulled out of schools. And from what I understand, critical race theory is not actually in schools. There's teaching of racism and inequality, but it all gets lumped into that because that's what the opposition seems to do, is just the guy.
Very good. And Dr. Sullivan, you want to add to that?
Sure, I'll build on it. You asked how do those who oppose critical race theory, how do they define it?
Yes.
And I'll say I've heard a number of uninformed opinions of what it is. Really wild definitions, but at its core, some of the tenets of critical race theory are that racism in society is normal. Race is a social construction, and another tenet is that whiteness is property, whiteness is status, and people of color, non-white people, can counter racism in society by sharing their stories, sharing their narratives, and so it's the sharing of those stories that they are against. It's the sharing of, even at kindergarten, the first grade, sharing how sometimes the government has not been fair to people of color, that they are totally against. Because at its core, this nation was not designed for us. So we were never supposed to have access to health care. We were never supposed to have access to education. We were never supposed to have access to affordable housing or housing or anything like that. So how dare we, had they not been designed or created for us, ask to talk about some of the inequities that have existed. The institution of slavery, the Middle Passage, yeah, we did that to you, but we don't actually want to talk about that. Because it doesn't talk about the truth.
Oh, can I just add that?
Yes.
Such a really great point. Racism operates in four key ways. when you're teaching critical race theory to adults, okay, you're teaching them that racism operates systemically, institutionally, interpersonally, and then internally. And what oftentimes I see it do with the point that Dr. Sullivan just made, which is so great, is a lot of times white people want to focus on the interpersonal piece. They want to talk about, content of the character, and we just love each other, and I really don't have nothing against you. I got white friends, and my neighbor is black, and my daughter-in-law is black, and I got black grandkids, right? These are the narratives that come up, so I don't want to deal with this. What critical race theory is doing is it's saying, let's take this out of a personal narrative conversation. Let's take this outside of just your own unique, isolated experience, and let's understand race and racism within the structure, like my fellow panelists have said, within the fabric of the country. And that is where there's intense opposition, because critical race theory has been forcing all of us to really understand systemically and institutionally how race and racism operate.
And on that note, we will go to the next question that says, if you want to take it out, how does this affect the education system? The question is, does the school board support teaching critical race theory, or do they feel threatened?
I think it depends on where you are regionally.
Regionally.
Meaning, so if you are in a blue state, like California, there are little pockets of parents in certain counties that revolt, but generally speaking, how race is discussed and how it's put into the curriculum is dependent on the politics of that state or the politics of the area. So your more left-wing areas are going to be a little more open about those conversations, and now the last couple of years we've noticed that areas that are more right-wing are doing more to go to school board meetings to have conversations about how race is being talked about in the classroom. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. I think it depends on the politics of the area that you're in.
I like that point. True. Depending on the politics of the area that you're in, because we will discover that the school board plays an intricate part in this race theory, depending on where you are. If it is of their interest, where families try to disband the board, try to disband the education system because of race, because of the critical race theory, and what is their motive, what is their plan? Dr. Sullivan, what do you have to add to that?
Okay, so So I taught as an elementary school teacher for about 12 years in public schools, K-12. And when people say things like, they're trying to teach critical race theory in our schools, I've never tried to teach critical race theory. That is such a graduate level discussion to have. So I was not trying to teach that. However, some of the standards that are covered in schools and social studies could include talking about Christopher Columbus. Mm-hmm. And so when you're teaching about Christopher Columbus to students, there's really this celebration of what he did, and celebrating how he discovered all of this land and the land that people already lived on. But what we don't hear about is how he raped and pillaged and brought diseases. And that is the story that kindergartners need to hear. They need to hear. He wasn't this person who was just, that we need to fantasize and romanticize. We need to hear the full story of who he was. And what he found was people who were living there and he destroyed them.
And displaying the fact that he discovered in the world that nobody was even there. Distorted of information.
Can I just say something? I have a question. Could it be that both extremes are wrong? So we don't have to say to kindergartners, hey, look at this guy, he rapes people, but we also don't have to deify him either. You get what I'm saying? Do we have to tell kindergartners that, look at the horrible things that this guy did, which I agree with you? You think that's
In my opinion, when I think about a curriculum why is he part of the person's?
Oh, I agree. I don't think he should be deified. I think there maybe the way we talk about him not as this hero, which I agree, but to tell kindergartners all the evils that he did, because that's also a criticism of the other side, which is why are we introducing these sorts of high level, because even for adults, talking about race is kind of uncomfortable in certain situations. So to introduce that to a kindergartner, I kind of feel like I guess for me as a mom, I wouldn't want that conversation being had by a teacher. I want to be able to introduce those types of concepts and how we are, what our color means in this socio-political context. I want to be the one to have that conversation with my children.
Right, I understand that. And
Wait. You can have questions later.
and I would not use my kindergarten students or students the concepts of race.
Okay.
That, yes. Pillaging, yes. However, do they need to hear those stories in my opinion? Absolutely, yes. And the reason why adults are so uncomfortable with discussions of race is because they don't often have conversations about race. And so when we start having conversations at a very young age about race, then we can become more comfortable as we age to then continue the conversation. And that is why there is so much segregation and separation between races, because we are not comfortable having these conversations. But if I can get my 5-year-old to start thinking about those ideas and concepts, then that's in my opinion.
I think the other thing that's important to say is 5-year-olds are racialized persons, and they are having racialized experiences. And so because of that, they also need the language to know how to even describe what am I experiencing when a fellow student comes up to me and starts pulling on my hair and calling me a name. How then do I, as a 5-year-old, make sense of what's happening? So I totally agree with what you're saying, is that I do think it is age appropriate at different levels. But I do think that we've got to give language to children so that they know how to describe what they're experiencing. But then also, as they get older, like we've already talked about, now as older persons, we can dialogue about the systems and the structures. We don't have to talk about the legislation to the 5-year-old, but I should be able to have a conversation with a 5-year-old about my skin color.
We're gonna make an exception here.
So Miles, when he was 5, in that school, most of the schools were Hispanic, but he came home and he sat in my lap and he asked me, why am I so black? My 5-year-old son came and, because he's a thinker, he doesn't talk much, but he thinks. So he came and he sat and he says, Mom, why am I so dark? Why am I so black? Where in the world did you hear this? So little children were in the classroom saying, don't play with him, he's too dark. Why are you so black? Of course I went to the teacher, they did a whole curriculum, the whole rainbow thing come out. But to this day, I'm telling you, that thing impacted him from 5. And I had to put him on my lap and speak truth into this boy. To say, you are worthy. You know what I mean? Like, you are beautiful, handsome. Like, I was trying to come up with everything at that moment to pierce my heart for him to feel, because now he's been gone all day. Come on, and he had that on his mind. You understand what I'm saying? He had it on his mind from all the way from school. That's hours. That's like 7 hours. Can't hold this 9, 10 hours. I know I'm dramatic right now, but that was a big deal to me. At 6 o'clock at night, 12 hours later, that's still on his mind. And he came and he said that he didn't know how to feel about those words. But when he went to school, even though I spoke to him, I had to reinforce it from that day on. That was it was done. I don't want to use the word damage, but the insight of what other people spoke into him made him feel a certain way.
Can I say something really quickly? So when we think about the black doll experiments, agreeing with what you said about how even at 5 years old we're hyper racially aware. So the black doll experiment, I think, I don't remember the name of the psychologist.
J. Elliott.
Thank you. Okay. You know, little black children would prefer to play with the white doll, and when they're asked, why don't you pick the black doll, they say because it's bad, right? So, and that study was both reliable and valid because other researchers repeated it and continued to get the same outcomes. And the last time I read any studies about it was 20 years ago. But when I make this conversation, when I think about myself as a theorist versus how I think about myself as a mother to a black son, as a black women, we experience racism in this country, but black men experience it significantly, exponentially worse than we do. So as a mother, I did not introduce the conversation of race to him because I felt like he's gonna have to deal with it for the rest of his life. So whatever window I can shield him from having to think about it, that's what I'm going to do because he's going to be hyper aware of it for the rest of his life. So I didn't introduce the topic of racism or anything. He understood. He used to see me go to George Floyd protests, even I think 5 or 6 years old. He knew what it was about, but I didn't talk to him about it because I felt like, enjoy being a kid, because you're going to be attacked for being a black man for the rest of your life. So my issue with introducing these conversations too early, it's not necessarily because the reality doesn't exist. The reality is so there. Let's give our kids, especially our sons, as much time not to have to carry that stuff on their shoulders as possible. Now, if they come home and somebody's talking poorly to them in school or ostracizing them because they don't look like the rest of the kids in the class, then of course I'm not going to ignore that if he brings it up to me. I'm going to always affirm who we are, our history. But I never felt like it was necessary to talk to him about it. Like, now we discuss it because he's 10, he's about to go through puberty, so we talk about cops, we talk about white people, we live in a white neighborhood, so I'm very explicit with him now. But at 5 and 6, I made the conscious decision not to be, so he could just enjoy not having to think about that again, because he's going to be hyper aware of it at all times for the rest of his life. So I just wanted to just give a different perspective.
So I just want to give the opposite perspective because I was of the same thinking that it's too early. I lived in a neighborhood where it was predominantly white. My kids were like only in their class, and and I also decided, to go slowly in introducing them to the concept of race and identity. Well, the first aha moment I had was when my daughter came home and said, we were walking in, walking in the building, someone walking their dog, the dog is brown, and she says, oh, look, we're brown like the dog. That was the first thing I was like, okay, reset, we need to talk. Then she was in school with all my kids, and this was her schoolwork, social circle. And I think, what happens at home is obviously bringing to school. So I remember one day I was in the kitchen, came home, and I'm on the floor, scrubbing the floor for whatever reason, and she comes to me and she stands over me and she says, Mom, Anna says it's bad to be black. And I stopped in my tracks. It took me a minute to collect my words, and then, the only thing I could think of to say to her was, what does Anna know about being black? She's never lived. And that was all I could say to her until I came up with a better answer. And she she was okay with it, and then we kind of had a deeper conversation. But I say that to say that, like, when we think that we're doing them a service by avoiding these conversations, we're actually not. We're doing them a disservice because they have to go out to, they're in the room, right? For more hours away from us, usually for working parents. And so if you don't control the narrative, someone else will for you.
That's right.
So I think there's another thing I want to add as well. So before I worked for Maryland Humanities, I worked for Howard County's Office of Human Rights and Equity. And I was working with hate bias incident reports with police officers. And the ACLU reported last year that there's a significant increase in racial profiling and racial violence in online gaming. So what the ACLU found last year is that on the game Roblox, I'm not talking about Call of Duty 4, I'm talking about Roblox, that your 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds playing. They were able and were building concentration camps and were putting people in them in the game. So that when the event, Roblox, they're not setting it up for you to play the game like that. They find out the kids are doing this. Now they've got to step in and prevent kids from being able to do this kind of thing. So I say that to say, sometimes our kids are also coming in contact with hate at significantly earlier levels because of the online access as well. So it's not even just my personal experience with my peers. I'm also coming in contact with language and visuals, and I don't know how to make sense of any of this. I don't know what any of this is. I don't know the context for it. And so I happen to be someone who, I grew up in a home where I legit don't remember not being black. But I feel like my parents had a conversation. I don't think I had words. And my mom was just like, you know, you black, right? I feel like that's what she was doing, you know? And so because of that, right, I went into, kindergarten, first, second grade, very, hey, what's up with that? I don't see no pictures of Malcolm nowhere. Who's this little kid? Jokingly, right? But in all seriousness, because my parents, my mother in particular, gave me such a strong understanding of who I am and my history particularly being rooted in this country. My particular background does not have any voluntary immigration in it. And I say that purposefully, right? And so being rooted in this here land, I needed to really understand who I was and how other people would see me. And so when I went to my Adventist elementary school, I was in kindergarten, and I went to music class. And this little white boy comes, we're just standing in line, this little white boy comes, he kisses me on the lips. Music teacher grabs me, drags me to the principal's office, and is scolding me the entire time. Claudia, we don't do that here. They call my mother to suspend me for the white boy kissing me. At the age of 5, I can promise you, I didn't have the words, but I knew injustice was taking place.
Right.
I knew that this was because I was black.
Right.
And so when my mom came and stepped in and advocated for me, praise God for that. But I also praise God that I fundamentally remember as a kid thinking to myself, I am not in the wrong.
Right.
I am not in the wrong. I know I did not do anything wrong. I know that I am in the right. This is an injustice, and so I am not going to walk in shame, even though that's what they're trying to put on me. So that's also why I think it's important that we give this to our kids so early, because I don't want our babies walking in shame when it's white adults or white kids or whoever it might be that's trying to send them, these kinds of mixed messages.
Can I just add an example to what you just said? My younger daughter, she was in the 4th grade at Clinton Elementary School in Maplewood. And she went to the librarian and she said to her, there are not any black books or posters here. The librarian asked her a question, well, do you read at home? She said, I've read every book that we have, and I've read all the white books here. We have no black books. As a result of that, they have a book fair. And the black presenters pastor was there, and all the array of books, black authors were there. And she was given a recognition. As a matter of fact, I have the trophy sitting on my mantle at home. Recognition for book reading, Monique Perry. And that's an example I wanted to share with you with what you said that.
Can I say something? Because I had an experience with Josiah when he was in kindergarten. He came home one day, because he's mostly been in mostly white schools since he was a kid, and he was a kid. He came home one day and he said, a little white kid said, the color brown is ugly. And he was trying to get some type of rectification of the world that we grew up in, where we're proud of who we are, versus what this white kid is saying to him. And I simply said to him, honey, brown is a color that provides nutrients to every single thing that exists on this planet. And then the conversation was over. The other thing too is when I was a kid, I don't know if those 80s and 90s babies, whenever I used to color, I always colored my people peach. I don't know if anybody else remembers that. I didn't even think I had brown skin. Let me color my characters brown to look like me, because growing up in the 80s and 90s, we didn't see cartoon characters that looked like us. We didn't see Disney princesses that looked like us. So I didn't associate my race with those things. So anyway, I said all that to say that I introduced Josiah to conversations about race a little bit later, but he instinctively always drew his people brown. No one told him to. When he writes essays about the things that he's the most proud of himself, he talks about his hair. So I think that there are ways, I think these conversations can be had in gradations. I think that there are ways that we can talk to our kids about racial pride, and it doesn't have to be in the context of us. Yeah, sometimes it needs to be like that. Because now I'm like that with Josiah all the time. I'm like, you can't trust these white people. I wasn't like that. No, truly. I'm being real honest, and I'm very honest with them. Like, in your school, they're gonna probably associate you with the negative behavior. You defend yourself, don't worry, they can call your mother and they can deal with me. But again, at 5 and 6, I'm not being Marcus Garvey with him at 5 and 6. Now I am. I want him to enjoy, I guess, delusion a little bit. I don't know how else to say it, but I want him to enjoy the freedom of not having to think about it for as long as humanly possible.
Dr. Sullivan, I know you want to talk. You don't want to touch that.
I want to give an example of a mixed race child. That is my grandson, who is 4. And just understanding that he sees differences all the time. And he is technology savvy. And he deals with a lot of people. But he understands instinctively when he's being treated differently. We all do. And this doesn't have to be mean, which is what you're objecting to. Black people in general tend to approach things kindly, but you do not have to be mean to help your children critically think. And I'll just give you an example of what my grandson said to my son. My son is darker than me, darker than Margaret. But this little boy He's very bright. And he's speaking to my son. We're not talking negative ways. My son says, let's sit Indian style and do such and such. I said, no, Dad. We do not say Indian style. We sit cross-legged. Critical thinking is helping children understand how you approach, how to ask why, how to ask how, and how to approach a subject. Sitting cross-legged doesn't require for you to label anybody or anything. And this is where we are going, or we must go, for us all to live peacefully together.
Thank you. All right, on that note, we will transition into our next question. Question number 4 says, what was the reaction of some teachers? Question number 4 says, what was the reaction of some teachers in the state of Nevada when they learned that Nevada Family Alliance had proposed putting body cameras on teachers to make sure that they weren't teaching critical race theory in the classroom? Yes, it is a fact. In other words, the question is asked in Nevada, why is it so critical and important that the families of Nevada must monitor the teachers to make sure they know what they're teaching their children? Who wants to touch that?
I'm not sure. So I don't know if the question is why they would do that. I think the motivation.
What will make the motivation? What will cause them to do that? Is it fear?
I think it's fear, right? You don't want. I think a lot of it is the opponents of critical race theory want America to be spoken of in a certain way, only highlight the good and keep all of that under, so that can't be, right? So I think with the idea of putting cameras on your teacher is just demoralizing, because you're not only saying we don't trust the school board, we don't trust the administration, but now we feel like birds of a feather flock together. It's going to carry on into the classroom, and we can't trust that you won't do what we say you're going to do. That is for me, that's the only motivation I can see, trying to just control the situation completely and make sure that content that we don't want kids to learn in the classroom remains out of the classroom.
And to show how much power parents have.
Well, I think that goes without saying. Like, if they can get rid of school boards, I don't think the teachers have any disillusion about the security of the jobs.
Not only that, they were showing where some of the parents are not even, their children are not even in the school system. They're not attending the school, but they're in the affairs of the school to make sure that you do not teach critical race theory. All right, let's go to question number 5.
I think it's because what we're seeing is the dumbing down of America, where they cannot. Same reason why you burn books. You don't want experts to be in charge. Incompetency is easy. And you can motivate through incompetency by just getting a slogan, by socially steering people through social media or whatever, and because you can make facts, you can control, but you don't control facts, you don't control competency, so you don't want it.
I totally agree. I think what you said about not controlling facts, I think that's part of critical race theory, right? It says that the historical evidence bears to proof that these connections that they're trying to make between conditions now and how it was framed are reasonable because of what you see now. So I think, yeah, you're right on.
Most people receive their news from outlets that kind of confirm whatever their ideology is. So a lot of the parents that have been kind of rising up against critical race theory is because they're listening to right-wing news outlets or right-wing propaganda outlets. And according to them, right, critical race theory is another way of including communism, Marxism, socialism into the curriculum, into the minds of children. So they're rising up against it because of the political ideology that critical race theory is connected to, which originally was critical theory. So again, I don't agree with them, but their perspective is that you're introducing anti-American Marxism into the minds of children prematurely, and that's not okay with them. So that's why they're rising up against the different school boards throughout the United States. And I don't know the specifics of Nevada, but the story is pretty much the same everywhere there's been that issue.
That's true. You want to touch that? Oh, okay. All right, on that note, we're going to get to the next question because I want to get to the audience. Question number 5. Some believe that critical race theory has been used by some as an argument to ban the teaching of such concepts as race, racism, white supremacy, equity, justice, and social emotional learning, as well as to limit the teaching of content such as slavery, Black history, women's suffrage, and civil rights. Efforts to ban these topics aim to eliminate any meaningful discussion of race or the historical roots of racism in our classroom. Question: do you agree or disagree? And if so, elaborate. All right, here's what they're saying. There are those who believe that the race theory should have been eliminated completely.
Critical race theory
The critical race theory should be eliminated or banned from the school system because it focuses on race, it focuses on racism, it focuses on white supremacy, equity, justice, social emotional learning. And it also limits the topic of even talking about race and historical roots of racism. Because of that, they want it to be banned from your classrooms. Let's not talk about that in the classrooms. Question: do you agree or do you disagree? Should we not talk about race? All that we talked about should be eliminated from the classroom. In other words, February is Black History Month. Should we not talk about Black achievers? Should we not talk about what they have done? What the journey of Black accomplishments, the journey of Black history? It must be eliminated. Why? Because it falls under the umbrella of critical race theory. Should we not talk about emotional wellness? Because it falls under, he lives in poverty, he lives in a poor community, so he has mental issues. We should not talk about that in the classroom. Should that be eliminated? All that falls under the umbrella of critical race theory. Should that be eliminated from the school curriculum?
So this is part of my confusion with critical race theory. It's not my understanding that all of the things you just mentioned, I don't see that as the, how you apply critical race theory, right? It's two separate things. Yeah, so critical race theory is a concept to explain conditions. And I think that's part of what the opposition does, is to create all this noise where it confuses people.
It misinterprets.
Like, even as a panel, we all define it slightly differently, right? Like, at the core, it's meant to analyze the question of inequality, but then everything kind of gets
pushed
put in there and it gets completed. So the things you mentioned just now, I don't know if that's how you apply critical race theory to that, so I'm not sure if that's applicable, but in terms of whether critical race theory should be taught in the classroom, you also mentioned it being removed from the classroom. Again, part of the confusion, you as an educator, is it taught in the classroom? No. That's part of my, yeah.
If certain pedagogies educate have critical race theory as an undergird to how they have certain conversations, but critical race theory is not really part of.
They do not call it critical race theory.
Yeah, it's not.
That's not under that umbrella.
Right.
So if you talk about race critically, it doesn't have to be under, I guess, the context of critical race theory. So,
But right wingers turn critical race theory into a bad word. So
right.
now whenever people hear it, they kind of freak out, but it's not really, it's not really taught the way they think it is in the classroom. B, talking about race is not necessarily talking about critical race theory.
and unfortunately, part how you frame the question is part of adds to some of that confusion in sort of lumping everything together. Where you don't
And that's what the Republicans are doing. So,
I'll say. I think it's about control. I think it's about control of content. We just saw in the news that there are some schools that are putting the 10 Commandments into the classroom.
Yes.
So, any Christian that thinks that's acceptable, you are a problem.
That's right.
The 10 Commandments have no place in the public classroom.
That's right.
But this goes to show you, right, that in the same way that they want to put the 10 Commandments in the classroom, they want to eliminate just basic history about the African American experience in this country. Or you have other groups like Moms for Liberty, and we're not talking about this today, but you've got other groups like Moms for Liberty that want to ban books that kind of talk about the LGBTQ experience and situation, right? You don't have to go down that road, but it's the same conversation about, I didn't really say, you know what I'm talking about, but it's the same conversation about control. I want to be able to control the content, the information, the knowledge that my child has access to. And if I fundamentally am offended by or find problematic what you are teaching, then I am willing to go above and beyond, even if that means petitioning the school board to not have teachers wear body cams. Is it appropriate? No. And so I fundamentally disagree to your question. I disagree that people should have the right to mandate their religious and personal opinions and determine what teachers can and cannot teach. The curriculum that we see in the public school system, and I really love for the educators to come in because this is not my field, but the curriculum, to my understanding, of the public school system is attached to the Department of Education. Like there's a whole system that has to do with standardization, accreditation, and a myriad of other things for why something is in the curriculum or not in the curriculum. And I think when we're having a conversation about African American history's presence in the curriculum, that is a conversation about truth. And you telling me that it is inappropriate for truth to be told in the classroom is problematic. This is not a moral issue. This is not a political issue. This is just a fundamental, you are trying to eliminate basic knowledge.
That's right.
That is counter to everything that education is about.
Counter to
That's
thinking.
right. That's right. Ma'am? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I just have some comments to make. I want to piggyback over what the pastor just said. And just to add to what you're saying, is to I'm just giving a little clearer passage of the question for the panel, which is the plan to erase Black history from our school. Now,
one of the things that James Baldwin said, and I took some of the notes over lunch to talk about it. One of the things that James Baldwin said is that during his course of history, great James Baldwin, history taught without the consent of my present. Does everybody understand that? What he meant by that?
We didn't hear it.
Oh, James Baldwin, one of his famous quotations that started the notion in 1976 about bringing education to Black people is that he said, history taught without the cognizance of my present. This is the whole dilemma of Black erasing Black history. History taught without his present. That means Black people was not present in history. So the whole notion of history, Black people was not there.
Yeah, it's the same thing like you say to Christians. How come there are no Black people in the Bible?
Yes.
People ask that question.
Right.
And there are Black people all through the Bible.
And that's a serious question right there, my elderly sister. Now, the dilemma that we're facing now in education, this big dilemma actually was more pronounced in 2023 when at the seat there, you had the Republican senator, and his name was Ed Oliver. He halted a bill that would recognize a semester-long African American history course. And part of that had to do with self-identification. Identifying what does not alienate us from others and ourselves. That bill was halted February 17, 2023. Now, presently in American curriculum, when the pastors talk about the Board of Education, there's a Board of Education that talks about standard. And those educators out there understand that standard. There's standard that has to be met. The standard goes by the entire year of what standard a child should cover. Now, in the curriculum right now in the American school system, or the federal standard, is that 1 to 2 lesson, or 8 to 9% of total class time is right now awarded to Black history in the U.S. history classroom. As you can see, that's a very small percentage, 1 to 2 lessons. Right now, this is the representation of our curriculum, and that really awards that. Now, the dilemma with this big question here, it's a very charged question, right? It's dividing states right now. This House of Representatives, very charged question right now. The dilemma, how to select an appropriate medium. That's what we need to be focused on as Black people, is how to select an appropriate medium. I heard the moderator talk about the Black teachers earlier on and putting cameras on them. But I want to let you know that just after, a decade after the Brown versus Board decision, about 38,000 Black teachers alone were taken out of the classroom in the South and displaced. So the camera put them there is mine, as opposed to taking 38,000 teachers out of the classroom a decade after Brown. I'm just showing you the history here. Now, I'm going to wrap it up here because I took some notes, is that the question that's been asked, the first concept of this Black history curriculum was by Carter G. Woodson. He's a scholar, and he celebrated Black people's contribution. And one of the questions that was asked is, should it be taught in school? And should it be the inclusion of not just Black history, but American history, which is what the panelists is saying, and the doctor far left. American history, it should be a part of the American history
that should be taught in school. Now, why is this important? I'm going to wrap it up soon, so someone is going to talk. Why is this important? Because when we look at education and the influence of the diaspora, the sermon today was the middle passage. And one of the things that resonates in my mind, that sticks in my mind with the sermon this morning, is that we cannot forget the middle passage. The middle passage is where everything started. It is such an important part of our history. It cements our present here as to why we have these dilemmas. And that's what we are all called the diaspora. We're all a part of the diaspora. We all came from Africa. My family was a diaspora in France and the Caribbean. Others are the diaspora in America. And there's some parts of Africa that I haven't touched at all. So they never went there. Right? There you go.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? What you talked about there was just a segue that I'm looking for to go into the next question. We have one more question before we go on. But hold your thoughts because you'll be able to expand and elaborate on this question.
Okay.
It says, as of last year, at least 35 state legislatures have introduced a bill to limit the discussion of racial history in their classrooms. At least 16 have passed them. Florida had particularly drawn national attention after Governor Ron DeSantis banned College Board's AP African American Studies course and supported new Black history standards that include a clarification to teach how slaves developed skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefits. Can you imagine? Now, talk about that. What do you think? What do you think, Doc?
I think that goes back to kind of, not creating a narrative for your child and having someone else create it, right? So instead of teaching the truth, now you're gonna twist it and tell someone that's
how do you benefit from being a slave?
Right.
And that's what he's asking.
I think I am a proponent of teaching this country's history, the history of slavery, the history of how Africans entered this country. And while I am a proponent of that, I also cringe because one thing you should know is, you know what Ron DeSantis was before he was governor? He was a history teacher. So if we do say, yes, we can teach the history of how Africans came to this country, you will have teachers like Ron DeSantis who will stand in front of children, who will stand in front of Black children, and will say, you benefited from the middle passage. It was good for you to be enslaved. Like, you learned, we gave you culture, we civilized you, and we've allowed you to enter society. And so while I believe, yes, we should teach that history, that is what comes with that.
Yeah. When I was in education, very well said. When I was I was a school counselor, I think 16, 17 years, right? And I worked in both traditional settings and alternative settings. Preschool all the way up to high school. And one of my assignments, I was working in an elementary school, and I had 64 fourth graders. And I'm going to take numbers out. Out of my 64 fourth graders, how many of them do you think were reading on grade level? And I'm going to tie it into the topic, but I just need to preface it with this. Out of 64, how many panelists with 64? How many y'all think? On grade level.
But 27%.
27%? Okay, or 27 out of 64, like a quarter. You say around a quarter? Okay, so 27%, anybody else? I think about it. Okay, anyone else?
I'll say
Just
2%.
don't even give me percentage. Out of 64, just give me the number of what you think.
3.
5,
3.
3,
I'll say 4.
I had 6 out of 64 of my 4th graders who were reading on grade level. So when I'm having conversations with white people about critical race theory, I'm all the way to the left. We should absolutely talk about it every chance that we get. But when I'm talking to us, it's a different type of conversation. 6 out of 64 of my 4th graders were reading on grade level. We get more emotionally charged at the idea of our history being whitewashed than we do at the fact that a significant number, the overwhelming number of our kids are not reading on grade level. So if we're not charged about that, there won't be any conversations about history because there's no history for them to read. When they go to college and they're talking to Bubba from Middle America, who thinks that they came and stole what was rightfully his, if they don't know how to read, they're not going to be able to articulate why critical race theory, why Black history, what systemic, the systems of advantage that benefit certain groups of people in this country. So we should certainly have these conversations. They're very, very important. But the building is burning down. Our literacy rates are literally on the ground. And if we want to be able to have informed conversations, we need to address the educational disparities that will get in the way of our children being able to understand their history, articulate their history, and get in the faces of people who try to eliminate our history.
So I want to say something real quick, and I really got to step out and head back. Part of why I think our literacy rates are so low is because we are reading and forced to read books that do not actually reflect or represent our culture. I am an English teacher, so when I'm dealing with reading, what I'm seeing in my students of color, and more specifically my Black students, is I'm sick of reading about Pip and Miss Havisham and their great expectations. Charles Dickens means absolutely nothing to me. And so you are trying to bring the tale of two cities to the southwest of Baltimore and forcing the kids to read that book and find themselves in it and connect with it and take a standardized test. Versus, I could actually just give you maybe a play written by Edgar Smith on Los Angeles and the riots in the 1990s. Now you're resonating with that because even though you didn't live in the 1990s and you were alive with the spring break riots popped off in Baltimore, right? There's so much literature that's available for us to teach and provide, and most people who go through their educational experience and they're specialized in African American literature and have no contact with African American literature. My colleagues, when we were doing our graduate work in English, if you decide that you want to do an African American specialization, this is partially why I quit it. I really don't. I had to specialize in American literature generally. I had to be proficient in William Faulkner, Walt Whitman, all those guys, on top of 100 years of Black literature. My Victorianists did not have to do that. The Shakespearean literature did not have to do that. The medievalists didn't have to do that. Only people that want to specialize in African American literature because it's considered what a subgenre. It is not considered real. So you have individuals that are going into classrooms who have gone through all of their academic experiences and have never read a Black book a day in their life. And so then it's like, oh, well, you know, you're coming in contact with students of color. Give them a Native American book. Give them a Black book. Give them a Hispanic book. Give them an Asian book. I don't have any to give you because I was never forced to read them. And so my thing is, I think we would see our literacy levels increase when we get our kids books written by us, for us, with our experiences in them. My world changed when I read A Raisin in the Sun my junior year of high school. Completely. My entire family from the south side of Chicago. When I read that play, I was like, oh my goodness, I see my whole family. Like, now I love to read. Now I love literature. Now I love writing. I think we just need to birth love for reading in our own people, and we've got books on books on books on books on books that can be read.
Thank you so much, Dr. Annie. Thank you, Facilitator. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. You have a question?
So while I agree with you, you're so welcome. You're so really good today. Right. That wasn't touched on at all. So the schools that you're mentioning about literacy, I'm sure these schools are not going to have one neighborhoods.
I always work in the hood.
Right.
And I love every minute of it, but it's in the hood.
So that's my point. You were making a case for critical race theory, right? Because if you're talking about literacy rates, and we're talking about communities that are impoverished, right? This goes back to tying together some of those policies that the framers created in order to see the conditions we see now, right? So you're talking about labor market, and you're talking about poverty. Kids who are living in poverty will probably go to school malnourished and cannot focus to learn. So they're not caring about, reading, putting a sentence together when their stomachs are growling. Right? So you have families that have been redlined in certain communities that are impoverished. So you're talking about the labor market, you're talking about the housing market, maybe their parent is incarcerated or in, somewhere along the justice system. So, and then all of that compounded impacts their education. So when you look at it and say, oh, we're thinking about critical race theory and basically we have bigger issues. No, the issues you're talking about aren't tied to critical race theory. These are the issues we're talking about. They're all connected, is what I understood in critical race theory.
Not only that, before you talk, 1 second, I just respond to what you just said. There was a research done in California when I was doing my master's as a reading specialist. So one of the things that was established and was pretty much common knowledge is that the schools in Chicago, most white, predominantly white communities, the educators believe that Black students do not have the intellectual ability to read nor to understand. That was a given. So they were never labored. The teacher never labored and said, well, you've got the ability, but you may not have the tools. Let me give you the tools and help you to read. It was a presumption that they did not have the intellectual ability to learn to read. It was acceptable. It became what we call the Pygmalion effect. It was accepted everywhere. So when a child is in a poor neighborhood, in a poor community, where mom has to struggle between educating them, keeping the lights on, putting the food on the table, it was a given, accepted notion that you can't be so you can't be so what? But then you have to have food, you gotta pay the rent, you gotta be able to make choices. It was a given. So when you find that schools in urban communities, 90% of the teachers are white, because it was given that your tuition will be paid for. If you go back to school and do your graduate work, it was paid for. Why? Because you're going to be the savior.
Well, white and inexperienced, right? Because if you're coming out of school, you don't have experience in the classroom, and you're being sent to these urban communities. What kind of education are they getting there?
Exactly.
Tying into critical race theory and looking at how inequalities impact people of color. Right?
I just wanted to piggyback off of what you said. I don't disagree in the validity of critical race theory at all. I just think I know it stokes my ire. It upsets me that when I get into these debates with people all the time about, and I have a little bit of more, I'll say it this way. I'll just put that to the side. For me, are there systems in place in urban school systems to keep our children in the situation that they're in? Yes. Are systems solely to blame for it? No. Based on my 17 years in education. Some of it is behavior. Some of it is people not necessarily thinking that, education is that important. So if you're part of a community, or you come from a family dynamic where you're not getting your homework done with you at night, and you're not being read to, and words aren't like, there was a study done that white kids, by the time they're 3, get significantly more words spoken to them than our children do. So my question then becomes, yeah, we know the system, we know how they feel about us. When are we going to take a little bit more responsibility over our own children, how we educate them and how we prepare them so that they can compete? So that was.
I think it's really important. That's a very valid question, and I've heard that before. But returning to something I said earlier, these systems were not created for us. Education, healthcare, justice, they were not for us. But if you have been a parent in this country for how many hundreds of years, and you have gone through very recently a system that does not want to educate you, does not want to teach you how to read, and you then don't know how to read, and then you become a parent, and then you have a child who you cannot teach to read, because teaching someone to read is not. It's not easy. Everything's special skills. There's very science. There's a science in teaching reading. And so we have this expectation, well, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and teach your child how to read, even though they are not doing it in the school system where they are educated at a university level. But I, as a parent, who have come up with a system, I'm supposed to now provide that service. So I look at it as victim blaming, but also we really need to think about some solutions in terms of policy.
I have a question, if possible, just based off of exactly what y'all are saying right now. Do you all have some practical tips or tools for us, whether we are parents, aunties, godparents, grandparents, whoever, or just a part of the community? Where can we fill in the gaps and the holes? Because sometimes I look at it as we are a puzzle, but there's a lot of missing pieces for our people, our children, if we allow it. But how do we educate ourselves? What do we do? What are some practical things? Is it make sure your child is part of the YMCA and you also do this, do extra reading, you know, about supplemental things? And if you have some specific examples as to how we can empower them.
Well, when it comes specifically to the literacy question, there's what a lot of parents don't realize, and I didn't realize until, again, the time I spent working in public schools, is there's always these educational trends that come out every year, right? And so what these for-profit educational companies will do is they'll say research-based or evidence-based. But then when you look behind the curtain, there's no real double-blind studies on it. They're trying to sell a product to a particular district, or they're trying to base their product over whatever the trends are. So one of the trends that has really affected children's ability to learn, with our children being the most affected, is the look-say method or whole language, which is when we were in school, we would learn to decode and segment words, and we learned phonics. That has, in essence, that was for about it started in the 60s, but up until very, very recently, that whole language method, teaching kids to memorize words. Like the kids in the school that I said I had 6 out of 64 fourth graders, they had to memorize 25 words so that they could get out of kindergarten. And then they learned the letter sounds in isolation. They didn't learn the letter sounds in terms of how to blend it. And so every year, the gap or the standards of what they're supposed to know versus what they actually know get wider and wider and wider. And then that's reflected in the state test scores. So for me, are there...
Is that what you're saying? Would you refer to that as sight words?
Sight words, yes. Absolutely. So for me, what I did with my son, because I was so paranoid about them getting him to memorize words, because I didn't want him to grow up not being able to segment and sound out, is I got a little book on Amazon for $20, and I literally, at the age of 4, I taught him how to read. So he went into kindergarten fully reading. And what I used to do, as a school counselor, we used to have things called intervention and referral services. which is if a kid is struggling, we get together with the social worker, the teacher, the parent, and we come up with different strategies to help them. I always told them, you can listen to what they say. Buy this book on Amazon and sit with your kid for 20 minutes, as much as you can, for about 3 months, and you're going to basically teach them what this school will not be able, because again, were there some teachers that were amazing? Yes, but I would say 70% of the teachers weren't that great for our kids. So I think the conversation should be two-pronged. Half of us, let's get on the crusade where we're fighting. Let's take the Du Bois method. Let's fight against the system. Let's fight with the lawmakers. Let's make sure that there's policies that promote equity. But then when we have the conversations with each other, if I'm talking to one of my parents with a kid who's struggling, I'm not going to say to them, hey, even if it's true, I won't personally say, okay, there's a system in place that's preventing your kid from being able to read. No, even if there's a system, you have power in that system to change the narrative for your child and to change the generational trajectory of our kids. And I feel like sometimes the conversation, at least when we talk about it, tends to be heavily focused on the system side without, but I have to be able to take responsibility for myself, knowing full well that this paradigm I'm in was not created for me. So,
and that's why I have to add to what you're saying. Sometimes you find that the teachers or the educators or the social studies team, they need to focus on working with the parents and discover parents can't read themselves. Parents cannot help, you cannot pour from an empty cup. The question now, they're paying you to find the tool or the instrument to help that child. The question is, how do you, as the educator, as you, as the social worker or the guidance counselor, how do you react or teach or meet on that level with the parent, with that child to make the movement? There is a gentleman by the name of John Ogden who wrote a book called Voluntary Minorities and Involuntary Minorities. And one of the things that he said, the voluntary minorities came to the United States to find an opportunity to better themselves. They left an area and they came where they're looking for improvement and looking for betterment. The voluntary minority, the involuntary minority came here as slaves. And the generation that came as slaves did not have any discussion or any decision making in the trajectory of their life. What has happened to their children? They try to make sure they're safe, not that they're educated. That will come, I'll teach you. You listen to me, follow what I tell you. And that went on for generations. So much so that the school of thought believed that Black people did not have the intellectual ability to learn. Because of that, we as Black parents, we have to be a little more cognizant of teaching our children. Some of us get involved in drugs. Some of us get involved in alcoholism. Some of us get pregnant out of wedlock at an early age. The generational curse of not being able to read begins to perpetuate. So it is a litany of reasons why we have children in urban communities unable to read. But as sisters, as Black people, we know that we are educators. The question is, what are we doing to close the gap? What are we doing personally to close the gap? So that you know the history, because we read in graduate school, we read in undergraduate school, we know all of that stuff. What are we doing? What are we doing? And so then we ask the question, well, the critical race theory says, they're not saying nothing that you don't already know. They're not saying anything we don't already know. The question is, they're going to tell you what I want you to do to my children because you're moving into my neighborhood. You're coming into my community. As you're coming into my community, I'm going to tell you what you will not do. That's what this is about.
Amen. This has been a wonderful discussion. Come on, put your hands together. We're already ready for a lot of stuff today. I will end with this. My best friend, college roommate from Oakwood, a guy named Steve Carroll, He had two daughters. He has two daughters. When they were young, he started reading at 2. And I asked him, I said, what did you do? He said, talk to my mother-in-law. I went to his mother-in-law. I said, what did you do? You know what she said? She said, every day from the children were 6 months on, every day, 5 minutes a day, I introduced them to letters and words. So by the time they started talking, they were reading. So the girls would say to me, Uncle Errol, when we were 2, we'd go to the library and we had a lot of books and people would see us reading and they were like, look at that little girl reading that little book or looking at the pictures. And we were really reading, Uncle. They were really reading. One today is an OBGYN. The other graduated over in 3 years, went to Georgetown Law School, knocked it out in a minute, and is practicing law. Because they started reading early. There's a little thing when I do counseling with parents for the education service. I talk about your baby can be one of those early reading tools. The earlier our children can read, the better their chances down the road. Am I right? It makes all the difference in the world. And you're talking about reading to your children, the importance of reading to your children while they're still here. While they're still here. And research bears a lot of that out. Thank you also. Well, Panelists did a wonderful job. Thank you all. Brilliance, just mind, just brain, everywhere. Just thank you, Elder, so much for leading this and guiding this ship. Come on, put your hands together for our own educator and parent for the Co-Education Day. Just a home routine. Just a home we give you love. Come on, put your hands together. Home, stellar job, all the way through. And the fact that we have these many people here this late on a Saturday afternoon speaks volumes about what it took to get this together. But most of us, and the cook, where's my sister? Let me tell you something. You better put some respect on her name. Because not only was the food good, do you understand the transition they had to make? Because the plan was to cook out, eat the food outside. Are you all understanding it? We're going to eat the food outside. Here's it. Come on up here, girl. Come up here. Let's get it. Come on, woman of God. Come on, woman of God. You put it on the put down. Fabulous meal. And then of course, come on, give it to me. You are an anointed woman of God. I bless you today. She put a little stuff on me, and thank you so much. Excellent, everything first rate. And then to make the transition from the plan to doing it outside to the team. God, I don't know if you had anything to do with this, you probably did. Taking the stuff that was on the tables, putting it on the shelves so we could use downstairs. That was just phenomenal. Great job, everybody. Thank you all. God bless you. Come on, put your hands together, everybody. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. Let's stand now for the benediction. And let's look to the Lord as we get ready to leave this place. Shall we pray? Let us pray. Great God and Father, this was a learning experience. And we just praise your name, God, for the scholarship, the intellectual landscape, the brilliant minds, the study, the work that has gone into these academic years to prepare to give back, to make a difference. And our prayer is that you will give each and every one of us not only the tools, but the strategy to take what we've learned and to make a difference with the people in our community. It's one thing to theorize. We often theorize, talk about what it was like and what could be done and what was wrong. But where the rubber meets the road is, what do we do now? How do we lift people now? How do we help the disenfranchised now? How can we be a blessing now? And that's what we're asking you to give us the wisdom to do, that we will indeed leave this place with an educational, inspirational raison d'etre to make a difference to this generation, to the young people, to the children that cross our path, that we will be a blessing in their lives. Now take us safely to our various abodes, to our various destinations, and keep us on this path, we pray. In Jesus' name. Let everybody say amen. Amen. And amen. Amen. God bless you, everybody.